Businessworld. Thank you, Anurag. Thank you, everybody, for having me here. And sir, it's a big honor to be sitting with you. I'd like to begin by saying that there are people who tell stories, who create art, be it painting, music, films, primarily to tell a story. And then there are filmmakers or creators who literally create a world or a universe in which you get drawn into, to the point where you're living, you're breathing those places, those dreams, those emotions with the characters that you're a part of. And when these films or these art forms get done with, you pine or you yearn to go back there and you revisit it again and again. And it would only be fair to say that Ali Saab's work is exactly that kind of stuff, at least for me, be it the movies like Gaman or Umrao Jaan. I'm sure you agree with it. So thank you so much, sir, for this opportunity to have a chat with you. When I look at your career, it's very difficult to put you into one category because there are so many things. The places, there's painting, there's poetry, there's music. There are also things like cars, horses, and then of course there is film. And now there is a book. I want to ask you, so what exactly was the thought process when you decided to write the book itself? Apart from, sharing experiences, was there something more, maybe a cathartic experience here that you were looking for?
Actually, a lot of people have been asking me, "Aap kuch likhte kyun nahi, kitab kyun nahi likhte?" But it's not easy to put your pen on paper with the intention of penning your life. Because I think penning your life is a very, very, very sensitive intention. And people go through lives without wanting to pen it. And I think we've lost a very big. I think every life is so interesting. Every human being lives a very rich and full life. He's got a lot of relationships. He's been shaped by many influences. He's been shaped by many problems. What drives him straight, what drives him left, what drives him right. So I think everybody is going through a process. And to understand that process through one's own life was a bit of a challenge. So I began writing this book just to, I asked a lot of people, मैं क्या लिखूं? कह रहे आपने ये किया, ये किया, ये किया. हमने कहा किया तो है, लेकिन अब इसको कलमबंद कैसे किया जाए? So that was a very tough task, and fortunately I got a handle. क्या है वो? मैं अपने घर को बुलंदी पे चढ़ के क्या देखूं? उरूज फन मेरी दहलीज पर उतार मुझे. So I thought, let's start from my threshold, which is Lucknow. And Lucknow, this is Lucknow. There's so many shades of Lucknow, and the Lucknow of today, which is of a certain kind. So I thought, let's start from the Lucknow of my father. A young boy who enters into Lucknow and sees Lucknow in like Alice in Wonderland, And he also, his stay in Lucknow is short-lived. He goes to Edinburgh, comes back, and then re-sees Lucknow from a global vision. So seeing Lucknow through him, through a global vision, was really I took that as a starting point.
Absolutely, and I think when you read the book, you mentioned, Alice in Wonderland. It really is a wonderland. I think the first couple of chapters are absolute. They're so illustrative. They take you to the streets of Lucknow and the royal family. But one, you mentioned places, and I want to talk about a couple of places in particular. One of them is Aligarh, where I think your love for poetry started, taking shape. And then, of course, came Calcutta. And, I wanted to read out a couple of lines from one of the pages where you've mentioned Aligarh in particular. That I went to Aligarh with no dreams. It was a city which slowly unveiled itself, the ugly, the bad, and the good. But I slowly realized that there's more to the city than what met the eye. Aligarh was the people I met, the meaning they gave to life, and the association they created for spaces. So I just wanted to ask you a little bit about this, because it has later always reflected in your work, you know, your love for poetry. So maybe a little bit about Aligarh and what you took away from there.
Went to Aligarh to study science because my father said कि भाई तुम science नहीं पढ़ोगे तो मतलब हल जोतोगे. तो मैंने कहा ठीक है science पढ़ते हैं. तो when I went to science, I went sense of wonder with, but not realizing that science is a tough job. You know, it's not easy to understand science, and especially when I took geology. और geology में वो पत्थर उठाना, पहाड़ों पे चढ़ना, उनके sections बनाना, it was very beautiful but very laborious, you know, and it required a lot of brain work, you know. But somewhere science was entering my soul, but through science I could see the beauty of the science of, let's say, sound, words, lyrics, meaning of the lyrics, how those lyrics began to question life. So Aligarh mein, what was very important was that I got acquainted with, इसमें जिक्र नाम है, with a thing called fikr. Because fikr अगर आदमी में नहीं है, तो he doesn't reach anywhere. तो मुझ में एक फिक्र पैदा हुई, which I will find in what is सीने में जलन आँखों में तूफान सा क्यों है, इस शहर में हर शख्स परेशान सा क्यों है. ये क्या है? ये एक फिक्र है. समाज के बारे में आपका एक कंसर्न है. तो वो मुझे उस अलीगढ़ ने मुझे एक दुनिया को महसूस करने का एक जरिया दिया, which I am carrying with me all the time.
Absolutely. Post Aligarh, when you went to Calcutta, and I think वहाँ पे advertising was what you started, you know, dabbling with along with theatre, and then of course you came to Mumbai and spent a considerable amount of time in Mumbai. From a business perspective, how different do you see the two cities? Because sometimes when I think of Calcutta, I think of a very romantic, you know, artistic place with the likes of, say, Satyajit Ray and many other filmmakers who consider storytelling as the essential medium. Whereas the moment you think of Bombay, you think of financial constraints, and a lot of those elements start coming into the picture. So, ये जो backdrop आपने बताया, इसके बाद जब Calcutta हुआ और फिर Mumbai, how did you make the transition at that point as a creative person?
See, both Calcutta and Bombay are the two major mercantile cultures of the country. I mean, this is where business is created, this is where products are made, and they go to the market. So when I went to Calcutta, I went like again with a open mind, with not knowing what to do. But one thing I knew, I didn't want to get into a box wala job, you know what I mean?
Right.
I wanted to do something which was as near to my heart as possible. So I stepped into advertising, and I came to know that Mr. Ray is the chairman of this company.
Yeah.
So I said, कहीं कुछ तो शायरी और poetry की हवा आती रहेगी. So I went into advertising, and getting into advertising was really getting into the thick of business. There's no business that can exist without advertising, and this is what I learned from Calcutta. But at the same time, it was like balancing between poetry and science. I was balancing between advertising and my art. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. Was it also in Bombay that the love for using film as a medium to express larger stories, you know, did that start?
I think this fikr or this concern about using film came from Calcutta. You know, I went with this concern from Calcutta because when I saw Mr. Ray working closely with Mr. Ray, I realized that, you know, how cultures can survive by an intense kind of insight into their artistic dimensions. And for me, he was a fascinating character. Like he was like the poets of Aligarh on one side and the filmmakers of Calcutta on the other side. So Calcutta opened a new world of cinema, and that was all Bengali cinema. And coming from an Urdu culture, I realized that maybe why don't we look at our culture in the same way that the way Ray is looking at his culture.
Culture, yes.
So I went with that concern, and when I went to Air India, obviously Air India opened a whole world, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there I made some films for Air India. First film I made was To Serve is to Love. So we got the first Boeing 747, and we got a little money from Boeing. And then I made a film equating Indian culture with service. So it was a very pretty film, but it opened up a new way of expressing things, you know. Like today we are talking about Instagram and videos and this and that, talking about moving images, but we are looking at very small little injections. In those days we could give bigger injections and you could create bigger impacts, you know, more lasting impacts. So that's what Air India taught me, to think big.
Sure. And just out of curiosity, you know, were the budgets at Air India to make ad films like extremely huge at that point in time?
It was realistic, you know what I mean? I was not making films hired by Air India. I was making the in-house films, you know.
Sure.
I was the only in-house person who had I was looking after publicity, which included everything, you know, at that time. I was working with Mr. Kuka. And so we were not hiring anything from outside. You know? In fact, what we invested in at that time is now phenomenal, you know, because we were looking at presenting the picture of India, the art of India. And at that time I started buying a lot of art for Air India. So Tayyab Mehta, Gaithonde, all these people they were not very expensive. But today,
sure,
the whole thing is worth more than the aircraft, you know. So that way Air India was an eye-opening thing. It was a landmark, and I think one of the most illustrious corporate giants of the country. You know?
You mentioned Satyajit Ray as an influence in the sense that he made films about his people, and you started thinking that, you know, you should also do the same from the areas, you know, you represented, and you went ahead and did that, creating films around Lucknow, Awadh and so on. But at the same time, I think this was probably the late 70s, when this was also the time when Bollywood was moving towards, you know, or had delivered huge hits in this action hero and angry young man space. So in a way, it was probably swimming against the tide to an extent to make cinema which was also based on realism. And I would like to you know, quote from chapter 7, which is Gaman, which was the first film, that you say that in no way did I wish to take the short route to success. Bollywood had literary giants, some of whom were reduced to pygmies in the hands of the cutthroat financial minds, who have survived all changes in financial systems, all the way to present corporatization of cinema. So how difficult was it to have your, because at the end what emerged was a beautiful movie, but it might have taken a bit of convincing people at that time, because this was the late 70s and pretty much the start of the realistic cinema that started getting made.
See, I never found myself very easy in Bollywood. You know, unfortunately, I was working in Air India, so I was not literally a struggler. You know, I had a place to live there, and I was in a sort of a job also. So I made my film during my earned leave. You know, but at the same time, unless a film catches you by the heart, tugs at your heartstrings, you can't create it. You know? And I couldn't see the commercial cinema touching me like that. I had to make my way into films through, like a film like Gaman, where the human helplessness was all important for me. So it was really the human helplessness which has been part of my film, the leitmotif through my film work, you know, and even otherwise, even the same thing has emerged in craft. You know, when I look at films, I look at rural helplessness. Then I look at my art, I look at design being given to them. So I look at things which have a kind of a, in a way, a ripple effect from one area to another area.
And one more, since we're on the subject of your film, one very interesting element of a lot of your films has been the presence of a very strong central female protagonist. And many of those films are told from the viewpoint of a woman, be it Umrao Jan or be it Anjuman, and you cast very, very, you know, powerful actresses like Rekha, Smita Patil, Shabana Azmi. How did that come about, and do you see that as something which is missing currently in today's Indian cinema?
Yes and no, but see, the one part of the world I see through my father, and another part of the world I feel through my mother. I mean, I see a bigger picture through him, things going wrong, but the inner chemistry of the helplessness comes from the woman, you know what I mean? So in Gaman, there's a protagonist who's driving a taxi in the city, and the other is the girl who stays back, just waiting for him. You know? So this is what I think, and then women are certainly carriers of culture. And then they are a buffer for the household from the external influences that are really challenging our households, you know what I mean? And they somehow try to keep the child sensitive, keep the child away from a lot of dangers, you know what I mean? And they are custodians of culture, you know. So छोटी-छोटी चीजें माँ बताती है. Even poetry and music, the folk music, actually comes from the femininity of a society like Gaman में वो कृष्णा का है ना आजा पथिक हरे पथिक गिरधारी सुन आजा क्या रस के भरे तो रिनैन. That's really a female heart yearning for Krishna, you know what I mean? And that is really the ethos of the village, you know? It's the helplessness of the woman, you know? So the thing is that how you take art into cinema, see, this has got nothing to do with Bollywood.
Sure.
Bollywood is a different chemistry. This is the chemistry of the soul, which I've tried to present through my zikr.
Absolutely. You know, there's a lot more that we can ask, but I think